Welcome to the WriterDojo with your hosts, Steve Diamond
That's me.
and Larry Correia.
Remember when I promised to kill you last, Sully? I lied.
Today's episode, Writing Action, Round 2.
Welcome back to the WriterDojo.
That was in honor of our topic today.
That's right. Now remember last time we started our two-part action extravaganza. And the thing that we left you with was to write an action sequence from the same action sequence from two different point of views, where the flavor of the character really shifted and changed how the scene was portrayed. And I think, Larry, that's going to really lead us into the beginning of our discussion of writing action part 2. And that's, what is your action scene doing for your book?
That's a really good question. Anytime you have a scene, and this is action or anything else, it needs to serve a purpose. It needs to accomplish multiple things. One of the things I like to use for action is, like, let's say that I have a revelation in the story that I want to give anyway. I could just have them walking along and having a conversation and have the big reveal, right? Yeah, that's great and that's cool and all. Or I can have that same reveal during the middle of a car chase. You know, instead of walking along, they're driving along rapidly, getting shot at, glasses breaking, window, the mirror shatters, they hit another car, they careen off. Oh my gosh, it's because of this. What? And it's like big revelation. And there's like a couple paragraphs of the reader going, what the crap? Wow, this really amazing thing has just happened. Oh, but then we're back to a car chase,
Yeah.
So it's drawing them along. It's like you could always do something boring or you could do something interesting. Now, that said, we've talked about in pacing before. If every scene is excitement and explosions, then that becomes the norm, and so that becomes boring. It's like we talk about the Michael Bay movies where it's explosion, 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 explosion. You get tired of explosions. This is the same principle. So if you have everything as an action scene, well, something is being revealed or characters being revealed or we're learning about the plot or whatever, that's going to become boring and samey. So you space these out, you put the action sequences in, you bump stuff up.
Okay, so when it comes to using action scenes to further, I guess what we're trying to say is we can use the action scenes to further any piece of your book that you need, whether we're talking about character development,
Yep.
The actual honest to goodness story that's going on, maybe religious plots within the book. I mean, you can use an action scene to further any angle within any of those areas.
And sometimes you can actually use those, and it goes back to that thing about plot, take it up, take it down, take it up as a sine wave. If you think about it, it was interesting you mentioned religious. Well, we got into that a little bit in Servants of War.
Right.
So we have an action sequence. Things are happening. It's very dark, very bleak, and all of a sudden, blip, there's a magical moment where our hero is alone and talking to an ancient god.
Yep.
And everything else is stopped, and it's just him and the ancient god. So we went from like pretty intense leading up to terror, and there's a conversation. So we just stop the action for a second. We have a conversation. It sets that refresh button. The reader goes, takes a breath and starts reading this conversation. Only the conversation is even more menacing and dangerous.
Well, that conversation really picks up. It's a different sort of tension. And it's a different sort of dread that's being introduced. And that's where we're revealing some major, holy crap moments.
And then once you go through that and you have your character has a chance to, in this case, our main character is like, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to stand by my friends. I'm going to say what I believe. And he does, and the bad guy's like, well, so be it. And then boom, we're right back into the action sequence. And so you change up the flavors. It's like you don't want to eat the same thing for too long. You want to get something else, and you want to kind of mix it up. And we'll talk about that a lot more later. But it's you give them this stuff, and you give your characters a chance to shine. You give your characters a chance to do cool stuff and action scenes. Put them in danger.
Mhm.
This is something we've not talked about, but one thing about action sequences is there needs to be stakes and there need to be danger. There needs to be consequences to failure. And, it depends on the action sequence, because if you could have an action sequence that's not life or death, it could just be something embarrassing. Like if you don't escape, you're going to get captured and you're going to look like an idiot, right? Like you should have been spying, or whatever. Or you could have a sequence where it's two dudes, it's not life or death, but they are fighting as in a training thing. And I've done that a lot, like Son of the Black Sword. So I'll have two guys sword fighting, but it's not to the death. They just have practice swords and they're hurting each other. But there's dialogue as this is happening. You see what I'm saying? But it's still action.
And we did a little bit of that in Servants of War also. I mean, I'm thinking of like the Gollum training scenes.
Oh, the Gollum training scenes. I would actually count some of those as action sequences.
Oh, they definitely are.
And we'll get into different types of action sequences in a bit. But so we got this kid who's basically this illiterate farm boy, gets put in this giant magical robot suit and has to learn how to drive it. And it is actually dangerous. And there is stakes. If he fails here, he could get killed.
Well, and we show what happens when you fail.
Yeah, we actually have another character who screws up big time. And I don't want to spoil it, but he screws up big time in this giant magical piece of heavy machinery. And just...
It goes very poorly for him.
And the thing is, I mean, it's awful for this guy, but also for the army. The commander is like, what the crap? This is taking a perfectly useful... object off the line. I mean, it's going to take months to repair this screw up, you idiots.
Yeah.
And the guy's dead, but he's replaceable.
And the interesting thing about that scene, Larry, is that it furthers several things within that story. One, character.
Yep.
Okay. Because we go into, and again, I'm going to speak in a little bit of generalities because you should be reading this book, people. Come on, son. So
you could learn a lot from it.
You could definitely learn a lot from it. Well, I mean, if you literally wanted to take the book and read that scene that we're talking about, it's about quarter to a third of the way through the book. You actually could dissect it and learn from it in terms of what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And that's that this scene furthers several pieces of the story.
Yes.
Okay. It is not a useless scene by any stretch of the imagination.
No, every scene needs to have some elements. And the more you can get, the better, as long as you don't obviously overdo it. And you've saturated the reader with too much information.
Well, so this scene, we further character
mm-hmm.
with the main character, Ilarion.
And his commanding officer.
The fear that people are feeling, the dread that people are feeling. And you're planting the seed in the readers' heads of all this bad stuff that's happening right now. All these characters are going to face that and worse once they get into actual wartime.
Also,
so you're foreshadowing
the exhilaration of the driving a giant cool suit of robot armor.
Yep.
And also, and we talk about take it up, take it down. We specifically took it down a couple times to explain for a paragraph or two how something works.
Yep. And so mechanically speaking, you're helping the reader understand how this world functions,
that way,
how these things work.
When we get later into the more intense action sequences where every move is life or death, we are not stopping to explain.
That's right.
This is how you shoot the gun from inside the suit.
Yep.
Because we've already explained that. So then we can just get to, we're avoiding the checklisting.
Yep.
Instead of saying Ilarion disconnected his hand from the controls to grab the charging lever, pull it back to feed another round from the hopper. We don't have to stop and say that because we've already explained it.
He recharged the gun.
Yep. And he, obliterated 25 dudes.
Right. Because that's what he does.
And so it's like you get those little bits in there. And it's interesting because we've established rules.
Yeah.
So if you have earlier action sequences, especially if you're writing something where somebody has magic powers or they're a superhero, you use your earlier action sequences that have lower stakes to establish more rules of how your stuff works.
Yeah.
That way, when you get to the more pivotal, big, intense ones, that stuff's already understood by the reader. So if I'm saying, okay, so the suit can do this and this and this, then later on when we have Ilarion getting better, we can show that this dude has improved because they have now seen in an earlier action sequence. You see this all the time is kung fu movies, martial arts
Oh,
movies.
yeah.
You know, as it's such a trope, but we do it because it works. So you have your lower stake action sequences. The Karate Kid is fighting the bullies. Then the Karate Kid is fighting, or he's training with Mr. Miyagi, also an action sequence. He's standing on a
pier post or whatever they call that.
I don't know. I'm not an ocean guy.
Uh-huh.
He's kicking. And then you got the final fight where the stakes are high.
And he's just using all of the things that are coming.
He's using all the stuff that they showed earlier.
Okay, you and I are both fans of the OG Top Gear.
Oh, I love
Okay.
OG, yeah.
Do you remember? I don't know if you remember this episode. There's an episode where they were working with, they were kind of sort of working with a film crew to do a chase scene in the cars.
Yes.
Do you remember this one?
Yes, and I've actually watched the cop movie they made.
Right. But remember
The Sweeney.
There you go.
It's called The Sweeney.
And the joke of the episode was they're in the middle of this intense car chase, and they're like, but look, what we need to describe in the middle of this scene is how the handling of this specific car makes it so that they can take these sharp turns to get away from the car. Because look, there's no realistic way that car A that's trailing and chasing wouldn't catch up to car B. Like, that's just silly. So we need to describe the whole, and so they shoot it. They shoot that scene, and they kind of intersplice in within the scene, like they're explaining exactly how the car works because blah blah, and it's terrible.
It's so funny. 'Cause I remember watching that.
It's hilarious because you know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, because it's like, well, if we're gonna do this, because Jeremy Clarkson's like, well, that would not be able to go around this corner like that unless you engage the traction control. So we have to show how you engage the traction control, and he's like, reading from the manual, and the two guys are driving the car doing an action. So we need to hold the blue button for 3 seconds.
1, 2, 3, and then they're back in this.
Traction controls, and then it cuts to like the cool screechy tire going. See, and the thing is, when they did the final, and then they showed the actual final,
right? The real
scene from the movie, and it's just all the cool, intense going around corners, because that stuff's all explained. Top Gun. If you guys have seen Top Gun Maverick, have you seen Top Gun Maverick yet?
It's so good.
I really enjoyed it.
Dude, it's so good.
Top Gun Maverick is another perfect example. Intense, important scenes all throughout it, but it establishes the rules to make the later scene, because that way when they're like, doing the canyon, the Death Star run.
Yeah.
And they're pulling the massive G's and doing the inverted flip and coming down and, they got to have 2 miracles. All that stuff is already known.
Well, and they've established the risks. They've established the stakes through errors.
Yeah.
That the pilots make earlier.
Well, when they had
dude, I love that movie. It was freaking awesome.
When they had a plane go down with the bird strike. That was one of those action sequences.
And it was totally random.
Yep. It was beautiful. And it raised the stakes, and it made you think about the characters. It told you a lot about the characters.
Well, and the tension in all of those scenes was so well handled.
The scene where Maverick and Rooster are dogfighting, and they're in like that DNA helix towards the ground thing where they break the
floor,
the hard deck.
Floor. Yeah, hard deck. Yeah, there we go.
I'm not an aviator. I know. And but there's that cool Cobra twisty maneuver they're doing, and so whoever panics first is gonna get shot by the other guy, right? What a great moment of character development in an action scene.
Well, and it's not just character development for one character or the other. It was that. But it was also just a perfect example showing the tension between the two characters and the history between them. Like, everything you need to know about those two characters and their history, you can get it in that 30-second scene.
That is so cool. Honestly, that was...
Right?
And that's a perfect example. So it's not just action for
Dude,
action's
we could
sake.
totally geek out about that movie for like an hour.
Honestly,
so good.
From a writing perspective, from a storytelling perspective,
They do so many things right.
it was super tight.
Yeah.
It was super tight.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they did that, everything had a point, which is interesting because if a sequence has a point, it lingers with you.
Yeah.
Not just for the cool flying effects, and not just for the cool, it looked cool. Because there's plenty of bad movies that had scenes that looked cool and were cool.
Looking at you, Last Jedi.
Yeah, but do you remember any of them?
No, because that movie's crap.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some beautiful stuff. Like I remember the theater. I mean, my first thought, like leaving the theater, was like, well, that looked cool.
Well, it's like Prometheus, right? When you and I left Prometheus.
Prometheus,
exactly the same
looked
thing.
Cool, but I mean, it was all pretty pointless.
Yeah, super vapid at the end of it.
So you don't want vapid action sequences. Your action sequences have to matter. You have to have stakes. You have to have development and growth or failure.
Generally, I mean, you need both.
I mean, because you look at Maverick, there was scenes of growth and failure.
Oh yeah, right from the very start.
And when you make dudes fail, then their successes matter.
Well, shoot, the opening scene of Maverick
with
is him succeeding and then failing hard.
Yeah, and blowing up the super jet.
Oh my gosh.
And then landing in Idaho or whatever.
Yeah, he doesn't even know where he's at. Earth. Such a good scene. So I think the point here, everyone, is that you can tell how Larry and I very suddenly got very geeked out about really good examples of action scenes that furthered plot and character story, like that really took everything that you were trying to accomplish and not just like helped it forward, but propelled it forward, that actively shoved it forward into your face, right? Because that's the point of the action scene. It's doing the same thing as every other scene. It's just doing it typically faster and more violent.
Yep.
Right?
It's when the reader's attention has started to drift for whatever reason, you bring them right back.
Yep. All right. So when we come back, we're going to continue this topic. Very likely we'll talk about Top Gun again because it's awesome. We'll be right back.
Dr. Megan McAllister was already an unusual human. NASA astronaut, professional astronomer, polymath, when she encountered the man in the black suit that night in West Texas. What Division 1 Agent Echo didn't know when he recruited her for Alpha Line was that she was even more special. But he'd find out soon enough. Award-winning author Stephanie Osborne uses the urban legend of the beings who show up at UFO sightings and make the evidence disappear to craft her vision of the universe we don't know about. Division 1 chronicles this universe through the eyes of recruit Megan McAllister, aka Omega, and experienced partner Echo, as they handle everything from lost alien children to extraterrestrial assassination to galactic invasion and more. Alpha and Omega is available in Nook, Kindle, and trade paperback wherever fine books are sold. Pick up your copy today.
And welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoy our discussion so far. And I think the biggest takeaway from the first half of that episode was if you haven't seen Top Gun yet, you're missing out.
It's
really freaking good.
It's a great kind of masterclass on action writing.
It really is. Now, Larry, I want to go into the next part of this, and what we were kind of talking about in the break was kind of your next point, and that's and I want to hear exactly what you mean by this, and that's that in real life people don't have hit points. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I've used this a lot. In real life, people don't have hit points, and what that means is that when a lot of us writers who haven't done actual violence in real life write an action scene, we tend to screw up a lot of stuff based upon our novice understanding of reality. And you can get away with that as long as everybody who's reading your stuff is equally clueless or more clueless than you are. But what happens is if you have anybody who has any sort of clue and they read it and it falls apart. And the reason I use hit points as an example is we've all seen this in movies. We've all seen this in books where people will get an injury that, like, you know, in real life you would just like die or be horribly mangled.
Yeah, but they had a good nap and walked it off in the show.
Do you remember Speed, the movie Speed?
Mm-hmm.
Shoot the hostage. And so the hostage is Keanu Reeves' friend. I think it was Jeff Daniels, if I remember right. It's been a long time since I watched that. Right. And so he's being held hostage by Dennis Hopper. And he's like, shoot the hostage. So Keanu Reeves shoots the hostage in the inner thigh. I remember watching this. And he shoots Jeff Daniels in the inner thigh. And I was like, dude, you just killed your best friend. Because, guys, in real life, you have this giant artery that runs through your inner thigh called the femoral artery. And if you sever that,
You're dead.
you're in deep trouble if you don't get a tourniquet on that. And even sometimes that artery will crawl back up into your pelvis.
It don't matter.
You're
hosed.
It's a big artery, guys. Like, and so you lose a ton of blood really quick. So that's be like the last place you'd want to shoot somebody. The other one that always kills me is like in movies, somebody gets shot in the shoulder, and they grimace. They get shot like kind of like by your clavicle.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah,
I'm pointing. This
yeah, we're pointing on a podcast that you guys can see. But that's where your brachial artery runs, and it's like, really big. It's about as big around as your finger. It's this big honking artery, and if you sever that, you're going to bleed to death really quick, and it's in a place where it's really hard to stop bleeding. One of the shows that actually gets this right is Bosch. There's a season, and there's a knife guy, Javi, and he kills this kid.
Oh yeah.
But Bosch is looking at the body. He's like, he gets hit across the chest and the neck.
Season 3 or 4.
I can't remember, but Bosch is sitting there with crate and barrel, and he's like, yeah, he hit the bleeders.
Yep.
It was just a great little bit. So guys, what I'm saying here is, in real life, the human body does certain things. Now, we talked earlier about like if you're writing Magic Princess Sparkle Adventure. Then you can violate all that stuff and have fun with it.
I mean, it depends on what you're writing.
Yeah.
Right?
Marvel superheroes. Okay, obviously.
Yeah, Iron Man would be dead like 400 times already.
Yeah.
Just from the sheer G-force and concussion waves.
And the deceleration.
He'd be red sludge in his suit.
So there's stuff like that, but it's all about the audience you're writing for, So you can do the superhero landing where a dude jumps off a roof and lands on his knee, because you're writing superheroes. Like, so if I'm writing Jake Sullivan, I actually do a Superman jump from the sky. It's set in the 1930s, so we do quite literally do it's a bird, it's a plane, it's a man, but it's in Japanese, so people don't realize that it's a bird, it's a plane, it's a man. As Jake Sullivan like jumps from space and crashes through a giant crater in the ground. The dude controls gravity, and he can make his body super dense, so it like makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So it all depends on what you're writing. But if you're writing something that's more realistic, it behooves you to learn stuff. One of the best classes I ever took, and most people wouldn't have access to something like this, but I took a wound ballistics class. It was from a Department of Homeland Security guy who's going through it was basically 8 hours of autopsy slides and watching people get shot, and we did rifles, pistols, shotguns. We did shotguns after lunch, which is great.
Oh,
because it's like,
seems like a poor choice for you.
Yeah, it was a poor choice because I'm not a squeamish guy, right? I've slaughtered a lot of cows in my life, and I was looking at that and I was like, oh, this is the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. And but you can learn a lot of this stuff from the internet too, just by like doing some basic searches. There's the old joke about I'm not a terrorist, I'm a writer for the FBI or NSA that is like observing this Google search. But a lot of the stuff you can look up to get your factoids right. It kind of brings us to the thing about like fake it till you make it and expertise. You're writing for a certain audience. If you're writing like my audience, I was at one point the #1 best-selling author in Baghdad and Bagram, okay, during the war. My audience expects meticulous, like, I mean, my stuff has to be spot on accurate with weapons and people who use them and the stuff that happens to you. And so one of the things, because I write fantasy with this kind of stuff, is I usually implement some form of magical cheating.
Yep.
Because otherwise I put my characters through the ringer. If I was realistic, they would go through the first fight scene and then spend the rest of the book
recuperating.
Yeah, because
in hospice.
I'm a 46-year-old dude. If I try to do some of the action sequences for Monster Hunter,
dude,
I would be going to the chiropractor for the next month.
Dude, we're old. Like, you get out of bed and half your body cracks and pops and the other half goes limp, and you're just like, well, crap. Well, I need physical therapy. Why? Well, because I got out of bed today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I spent 6 months in physical therapy because I decided to lift weights in front of my son like I was still in my 20s.
Well, I had shoulder surgery because I threw a baseball.
That's worse than mine.
You know
I was
what I
at
mean?
least curling 75 pounds in each hand, so I look pretty badass.
I did throw the baseball.
Popped.
I did throw the baseball, running up on it, barehanding it, and side arming it.
That's cool, man.
So, I mean,
That's
look,
totally worth the
it was
two
totally
surgeries.
worth the 2 surgeries that no, it was not.
No, yeah,
It definitely wasn't.
Yeah. So
1 out of 10 would not recommend.
So there's an element of realism like that. So unless you're writing something okay, so John Wick.
Oh, yeah.
I love John Wick.
Everyone loves John Wick.
However, John Wick would be dead 152 times over.
Oh, yeah. It's a superhero movie.
Yeah, it's a superhero movie. So if you're writing that kind of thing, then by all means you can totally do that.
The only realism we care about in John Wick are his reloads.
Oh man, they're so quick.
Yeah.
They're
good.
I say that as a dude chasing a fast coin.
Yeah.
Which only the gun nerds know what that means, but I'm within 0.5 of a second. I'm going to get that
Almost.
damn coin.
Well, you got your new gun.
That's actually where I bought it specifically. I want that damn coin. I'm a coin chaser. But so yeah, that John Wick has like some really cool stuff like that, but he would be dead. Die Hard. I think Die Hard's like a perfect movie, one of the greatest movies ever. And John McClane straight up gets shot in the shoulder enough to have an exit wound that sprays blood all over a door as he runs by, right?
Yeah, that kind of blood loss and trauma would really screw you up.
That would really screw you up. However, at the end of the movie, he comes out, he kisses his wife, she punches out a reporter, they get in the limo with Argyle and just drive off to Christmas music. It's like, dude, you'd be getting in the ambulance. Yeah. Just thinking from the blood loss from his feet. That said, so it all depends on, of course, the kind of audience you're writing for and what you can and can't do.
I always look at it this way, Larry, and that's when I pick up a book, like there's expectations with it, okay? So if I pick up something that's like military science fiction, I expect certain things. And that's, in general, I expect a lot of action, and I expect the action to be accurate enough to where I think, oh, okay, yeah, this person did his research. When I pick up a Larry Correia book and there's gunplay in it, I pretty much understand there's a kind of an implicit promise that gun stuff is going to make sense, that it's going to be grounded in a portion of reality. Now, what you talked about earlier, where you can put like magic cheats within it, depending on the type of story you're writing, that's fine.
As long as you establish it with the reader, you've kind of like made a deal.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm reading, if I'm reading a Harry Bosch novel, like I trust that Michael Connelly did his research, and I know he did because he was a freaking beat reporter for years and years.
He's going to get the police procedural stuff right.
Absolutely.
He's going to get the murder right.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to get the city right.
Yeah, and so all of these things, like you were talking about earlier, that really drives like who are you aiming this book at? If I'm aiming Werewolf Cop at people who like police procedural type stuff, well then by golly, I better get a lot of police procedural stuff right in there. And some of that's going to depend on, it'll depend on county to county, state to state.
Is there an urban fantasy that gets police procedural stuff right?
No.
That's an interesting niche, Steve.
Quite frankly, there just isn't that much that actually delves into it. It's almost always PI related.
Yeah.
And so PIs are a little bit more loosey-goosey.
Yeah. Well, with Harry Dresden just
and then Harry Dresden, he's like, well, I'm magic and parkour, so suck it.
It's so good, though.
Oh, no, you're right.
That's a good example as far as the action, though. Dresden Files.
Mm-hmm.
Dresden Files definitely has certain levels like that it sets. Actually, Jim does a really good job with action, and he's got the characters, their stakes. Jim kills a lot of characters, too.
Well, and
they always matter.
And the action scenes.
I'm still kind of mad about the half ogre or half troll girl from like the third or fourth one.
Oh, I'm still mad about Michael.
Yeah, we're not. So hey, we will stop on. Yeah,
punk.
We're stopping on. Nope. We're stopping on spoilers.
So, the thing is what I really like about Jim is that his action sequences have evolved as his character and story has evolved.
His dress has become way more powerful.
He's become more powerful. The stakes have increased commensurately, right?
Yep.
But there's there's some cool scenes. I'm thinking right around like books 7 and 8, where there's action scenes that involve a lot of characters who are not action-oriented characters.
Mm-hmm.
And and they add this really cool different flavor
Butters.
to it. Yeah, butters. That's exactly what I'm thinking of. And, you know, I love that Jim does that, because going back to everything that we've been talking about before, in the previous episode, in this episode, that's how you can use these action scenes to your benefit. And look, Jim is a martial artist, you know, and so he understands a lot of these sorts of things. And I believe that that's kind of one of the things that we were, you know, we've kind of been discussing it off and on, but let's kind of hit it really hard, really quick. And that's your expertise, bringing your expertise into it.
I've been able to use my gun background to really good effect in my writing career.
I've been able to use my fear of sharks really well.
Yeah, actually, because they take you right in fear.
Yeah.
Everybody's got something they know a lot about, and capitalize on that. And the areas that you don't know and you want to write about, then you need to go and learn as much as you can, because what's going to happen is the more you learn about that topic, the more cool stuff you're going to be able to put into those scenes. And so, like, I don't know sword fighting, right? I'm not a sword fighter.
Right.
And so when I did Son of the Black Sword, that was a whole new world for me, but I wanted to do an epic fantasy that requires, you know, sword fighting. So what I did is I made sure I enlisted actually Tony Weisskopf, because Tony was married to Hank Reinhardt, who is one of the leading experts in the world on
he
the
knew
topic.
all the things.
He knew all, and he was, like I said, he's one of the top experts of this in the world. And he's really one of the guys that brought about the Western martial arts revolution of Americans sword fighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Hank was the guy behind that. And so Tony was able to hook me up with Whit, who is one of his proteges. And so basically when I sent in a Son of the Black Sword novel, Whit goes over that, every single bit of edged combat and hand-to-hand combat. And he's like, it either passes the Whit smell test or it doesn't. And because it's a magical world with guys that have some like pretty high-powered inhuman abilities, because of their, you know, backgrounds, their magical backgrounds, I can cheat. So there's that element, but like anything that's like real people versus people, it either passes his Whit's smell test or it doesn't. And if he has a problem, he'll be like, hey, that's not right. That's not how you would do this. That's not how you would use a pole arm in this situation. You would change it.
The funny thing is, the very first professional edit I ever got was from Tony. And it was for my samurai story that's in the Bane Big Wicked Monsters.
Tony knows swords.
And I had a couple sword fighting scenes. And for the most part, my edits were pretty light on that story from Tony. I mean, super ridiculously valuable. She gets a lot of mileage out of her squiggles. But there was a couple that she was very, very specific when it came to some of the sword fighting and stuff and the blade work that I was using in the story. And she's like, no, that's not how that works. Fix this now. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's very cool. Like, look, guys, you can't know everything.
No.
Okay. But there's someone out there who does know all the things about one particular subject that you're deficient in.
You've been
gun guy for me.
I've been gun guy for a lot of people. And some people, they just know, I mean, this their background. And so they're going to be able to write it and not need help. But if you need help, there's no shame in asking. And honestly, guys, there's a lot of people who are really willing to help. They're willing to help people with their books. And be careful, though, who you ask. Make sure they are actually a bona fide expert and not just somebody who's blowing smoke on the internet, because that'll actually make your book worse. If you're writing a martial arts kind of thing and you grab some bullshito, it's the kind of guys Master Kin makes videos making fun of kind of thing. If you're writing gun stuff and you go and you used Dust, Detroit urban survival.
I was going to say urban survival.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And you put that in a book, people are just going to laugh at you. Okay, so make sure you get an actual expert who knows what they're talking about.
I remember I was talking with Dan Wells about this once when he was researching I'm Not a Serial Killer. And he's like, Steve, it turns out, it's always good to ask for help. He's like, but sometimes when you ask for help, it comes across very poorly. Like when you go to a mortuary and you say, hey, I'm really interested in seeing the dead bodies that you put in here and how you do your work. Sometimes they don't like that, Steve. So, You gotta be careful. Make sure you know what you're doing. Approach people right. In general, like you said, most people are more than happy to share their expertise with you. Now, Larry, we were going to talk about mixing things up in action, but we're out of time.
Yeah, I think what we should probably do, since we are the masters of this universe,
That's right.
I think action needs to be 3 parts.
Dun, dun, dun. To be continued.
WriterDojo is Steve Diamond and Larry Correia. Produced by Jack Wilder and Bear and Hare Studios. Theme song, Word Mercenaries by Craig Nivo. New episodes come out every Wednesday wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/WriterDojo, by leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on the Writer Dojo, email ads@writerdojo.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to questions@writerdojo.com.
I had shoulder surgery because I threw a baseball.